and we're live. Good afternoon. Welcome to Ask the Docs, a Fertility Institute of Hawaii live stream. This month, our topic is donor egg and donor embryo IVF, information for donors and recipients. So we have a few people here today. We have Dr. Goulet, who's a physician at the Fertility Institute of Hawaii. She works with me. I'm Anat Carmon, also a physician at the Fertility Institute of Hawaii. But I am so excited to introduce to you our special guest, Ms. Tiare Brown. Yay! Woo! If there was an audience here, they would be cheering. Tiare is our donor egg, donor embryo coordinator. And she is going to be answering all your questions and talking to us about the process, both for recipients, but also especially from the donor perspective, because she does work very, very closely with the donors. I do see some questions starting to come in, so we'll go over that as well. I think I see a question here: is it expensive? And so that depends. I know that that's kind of can seem like a wishy-washy answer, but it does depend on what type of cycle you're doing. And so we're going to go over all that and kind of get into some price ranges as well. So I think we should just start out by explaining exactly what a donor egg cycle is. So a donor egg cycle is when somebody opts to use the eggs of someone else. Okay, and so there may be a few reasons for doing that, but essentially what happens is eggs are extracted from another person. Those eggs are then fertilized with sperm and then transferred into a third person. That could be you, okay, or that could be a gestational carrier. Dr. Goulet, maybe you can go over the reasons why you might do donor egg cycle.
Yeah, the most common reason why I would recommend it.
Let me just say, Tiare, maybe you can mute. Sorry, Laura, I'll let you talk. Can you mute yourself because there's some feedback? Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Goulet.
Yeah, the most common reason why we might recommend a donor egg cycle nowadays is when a woman comes in at an advanced maternal age, and we already know, just based off of their statistics of likelihood of success with fertility treatment with their own eggs, that they would be much more successful investing that energy and time and finances into a donor egg cycle. So that tends to be the most common reason is when women come in, 40 and up. This might be a very viable reason. Another reason we would recommend a donor egg cycle is if a woman has gone through IVF using her own eggs and either had a very poor response, we weren't able to get a lot of eggs out, or if we did IVF, we got a good number of eggs out, but in the end, there were no embryos, and we're scratching our head thinking, well, there's either a sperm issue or an egg issue. At that point, we would say, well, we got to change something up. Let's either go with donor sperm or donor egg. And those tend to be the most common reasons. One thing that I see happening frequently is I'll have new patients come into the office and they come in and they know that they need a surrogate. And I'm like, well, why do you need a surrogate? And they'll say, we've been trying for 5 years and I haven't gotten pregnant. My womb hurts. I know it's got to be me, right? And that's rarely the issue. I mean, there are such things as uterine factor, but more commonly than not, the issue is either with the number or the quality of the eggs. And when we identify that to be the reason, the best next step is often donor egg IVF.
Did you mention same-sex couples? So same-sex male couples. Yeah, that's another reason. Obviously, they need an egg source. So, all right, maybe we can talk a little bit about the different types of donor egg cycles that are out there. So there's fresh cycles, there are frozen donor egg cycles, and this will vary by program and whether or not you have kind of the availability of a frozen egg bank or kind of a fresh cycle. But basically, frozen eggs is where a donor had eggs extracted previously, and then those eggs are now kind of in an egg bank, and You, as a recipient, can choose from any number of frozen eggs, and those can be shipped to the kind of clinic of your choice. And then we can kind of fertilize those eggs and transfer them into you or into a gestational carrier. The other option is to utilize fresh eggs. So basically choose a donor who has not yet donated her eggs. And then she will then undergo a donor egg cycle for you. And then all the eggs that are retrieved from that cycle become yours to work with and to achieve a pregnancy with.
And on that note, I wanted to add, when you have a fresh cycle, you do have options between choosing an anonymous donor versus a directed donor. And so some individuals might find that they've got a younger sister or a good friend that is willing to donate their eggs, and you already have a personal relationship with that individual. So you can go into an IVF cycle using their eggs directed for you. But more commonly, what we see are these anonymous donor cycles where the individual or the couple doesn't get to meet or know the identity of who is donating their eggs, whether it be a fresh or a frozen egg donor.
And then to answer the question that was posted of, is it expensive? Again, this really varies. So some of the insurance companies, especially here in Hawaii, will cover a portion of donor egg cycles. Typically, but not always, utilizing frozen eggs may be a little bit less expensive than utilizing fresh eggs. I think that there's a range in cycle costs anywhere from, let's say, $18,000 to $50,000 plus, depending on whether you're using frozen eggs, depending on the issue, depending on whether you're using an agency or not, and what those, wow, it's loud in here today. I don't know if you guys can hear that, audience. And so it's kind of hard to answer that question without knowing exactly what you're going to be doing. And like I said, insurance may cover a portion of that. I think we can move on a little bit to interviewing our IVF coordinator and donor egg coordinator, Tiare Brown. So Tiare, can you tell us a little bit about the process? What happens for an egg, from an egg donor perspective? What does she have to do in order to donate her eggs? What does she go through?
Yeah, so egg donation has become pretty popular these days. I think it's becoming more and more known just off of social media. You might have seen our posts on social media or on our website. But if you're interested in egg donation, we do have a website, ivfcenterhawaii.com, which you can go on to start the application process. So the application does involve you answering questions about general health, basic things such as your height, weight, educational background, what do you like to do, very simple questions. But after you kind of have done the formal online application, we do start a screening process in person that will consist of ultrasound. So we like to evaluate your ovaries to make sure you're a good candidate for egg donation. We'll do some hormone blood work. We also do genetic screening, as well as a psychological evaluation. So all of these things are typically required by donation centers as well as clinics and agencies in order to make you an eligible donor for someone to use. The process does take a little bit of time. It can take, 1 to 3 months for donors to complete. And I realize that seems like a long time, but it really does go by pretty quickly. Some of it is based on where you are in your menstrual cycle, so that can make things, longer or shorter depending on timing. But in general, we just want to screen your overall health and make sure you're a good candidate. I think as a donor, a plus to doing the screening is you actually get to learn about your own fertility, as a young woman. And I think that's really beneficial, to yourself, to go through the process. You're doing it for someone else, but you also get some information for yourself and your fertility as well. So that's kind of the screening in a nutshell.
I want to comment about what you mentioned in terms of looking at your ovarian reserve to see whether or not you're a good candidate for donation. So, there are many times where we look at a donor and we decide that, she wouldn't be a great candidate for donation because some of her fertility markers are on the low side. That does not necessarily mean that she has a fertility issue at all. What that means is that she may not be a good candidate for egg donation because we rely very, very heavily on being able to get a large number of eggs at once. Okay, so a donor may have a lower count than expected for her age, and that could mean that she's not a great candidate for egg donation. But hey, guess what? For ovulation and natural pregnancy, you only need to release 1 egg a month. You don't need to release 20. Okay, but for egg donation, we're looking for a nice large batch of eggs for the purposes of being able to help others achieve a pregnancy with those eggs. So I think that's a very, very important point for any donors who might be watching this, because although we do give you good information about your fertility, it is limited in a sense, and we don't really know what your natural ability, your natural fecundity is.
Terry, can you go into a little bit more detail as to what the responsibilities and time commitment of our donors are? What is expected out of them when they are donating?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because a lot of people want to do this but don't know what it entails. So there is a time commitment, but we try to work around your schedule as best we can. We're very flexible. So in the beginning, you'll come in for your first appointment, and there is an ultrasound and some blood work. It's really quick, and we try to keep most of your appointments under 20 to 30 minutes. We're also very flexible. Our office opens at 7:30, so we can accommodate early appointments as well as late appointments. So your screening visit, you will have approximately 2 to 3 screening visits that are about 20 to 30 minutes. There is a psychological evaluation that's a bit longer. It is about 2 hours, but it's done virtually in our office, and that is, again, very flexible. And once you're fully screened, when you actually get to cycling and donating your eggs, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, there are about 3 visits where you are in office again for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, followed by the actual egg retrieval procedure, which I'm sure we'll talk a little more about the actual donation portion. But main thing to know is that we're willing to work with your schedule. If this is something you're interested in and is important for you, your contribution is as important to us as your time is. So we are happy to work with you and work around your schedule.
There are some questions here that maybe, Terry, you can help answer. So someone here is asking, can you tell us more about the age restrictions, and does that apply to directed donors?
Yeah, so depending on the clinic and also agency you're working with, there are different age restrictions depending on where you go. Here at our clinic, in general, we are looking for donors between the ages of 21 to 28. Sometimes we work with donors slightly over that age if they are an experienced donor and have donated before, but in general, those are our age restrictions here. In regards to directed donations, so directed donations, again, Dr. Carmona and Dr. Goulet explained, are where you are donating to someone that you know, so it's not anonymous. A lot of the times it's a friend or a family member, and in those cases we do not have an age restriction. That is something that's discussed between recipient or patient using the donor eggs to see, is that something they're interested in considering the donor's ovarian reserve.
And then another question here, for parents who will be working with an egg donor, known or anonymous, how much time is necessary for the egg donor to cycle prior to extraction? So how many weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? And if she's flying to Hawaii to donate, does travel have any impact?
In general, so once a donor is screened, that process again does take a few months, but once you're ready to cycle a donor or start the treatment for the egg retrieval, in general, an average amount of time from the start of a donor's menses or period until egg retrieval or extraction in this case is approximately 4 weeks. I think Capri was asking if she's flying to Honolulu to donate, does travel have any impact? No, travel does not have any impact. For donors that we are using who are coming from out of the state, we do work with them to try to limit their time here. We know it's expensive and travel is tough for egg donors, so we will work with them so that most of their cycle can be done where they reside on the mainland US. And they will need to come to Hawaii for about a week or so. We bring them in about halfway through their stimulation cycle, around day 6 of stimulation. Most donors will stimulate for 10 to 12 days, so they're here for about a week and then they can fly home.
Okay. Dr. Goulet, maybe you want to just talk about the actual egg retrieval. What is it? What happens when we donate eggs?
Yeah. When you are doing the stimulation consists of a short course of birth control pills, then followed by injections that you are giving yourself in your belly every evening. And you'll do those injections for about 10 to 12 days, give or take a day or so. And when your eggs are mature, based off of your hormone levels from your blood work and your transvaginal ultrasounds, we then give you a special shot nicknamed the trigger shot that triggers the final steps of egg maturation. That also would result in ovulation if we don't go in and retrieve the eggs. And so we then do the extraction about 36 hours after that shot. And that extraction is done here in our office. We have a procedural suite. We bring in an anesthesiologist. They are managing your comfort and putting you into a nap. You're breathing on your own.
A nap.
A nap. You're breathing on your. It's the safest kind of anesthesia there is because you're not intubated, you're not paralyzed, and we can wake you up at any moment if we want to. And during your nap, we use the same transvaginal ultrasound probes that we have been using for your scans. We use that to guide where we use a needle and we snug up right next to your ovary, poke through the back of your vagina into your ovary and suck out all the eggs that we grew. Now, I think it's very important here to note that we're not stealing eggs from your future fertility, because I think that's one of the biggest concerns a lot of donors I speak with or potential donors I speak with have is, they want to help individuals, they want to donate, but they're concerned about how this might affect their ability to have their babies in the future. And the good news is you are no less fertile after donating eggs than you would be had you not done it. Every day, your body recruits hundreds of eggs, looks for the healthiest, shiniest, fittest eggs it can find, and throws them away. And there's nothing we can do to stop that egg loss. So what we do during an egg retrieval cycle is rescuing some of the eggs that have already been pre-selected and destined to go away that month. So after the retrieval is done, you spend a little bit of time here waking up, and we're making sure that you're comfortable, that you can eat a little bit and drink some juice. And then you go home and take it easy for the rest of that day. You have had anesthesia, so we ask that you not make any important legal decisions or operate any heavy machinery. But most individuals are able to go back to their daily activities the very next day.
Tiara, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you counsel donors regarding risks and side effects. IVF and egg donation is extremely safe. We do it every day. For us, it's no big deal. Okay, but every medical procedure, anything you do, anytime you leave your house, there are some risks and potential side effects that need to be considered. So how do you discuss that with the donors?
Yeah, this is a good question to ask, and I think going back to what Dr. Carmone said, we do this every day. We do, a handful of procedures every day, so very common. But what you can expect on risks, maybe side effects during the stimulation. So when you are doing the injections, we will teach you how to do injections in your abdomen, and you will be doing them at home every night. So when you're doing injections, it's subcutaneous, which means it's in the outer skin and fat layer. It's not going into the muscle, but with any sort of injection, the risks and side effects may include bleeding, slight bleeding at the injection site, just when you get an injection at your doctor's office, maybe some bruising, temporary, will go away within usually a day or two, and maybe some mild discomfort in the abdominal region. because we're kind of stimulating the eggs in your ovaries, and we're stimulating more eggs than you would during your own cycle, your ovaries do physically get a bit larger than what your body is used to accommodating. That may cause some bloating and a feeling of fullness in the abdomen during the stimulation process, but it normally resolves pretty soon after the actual egg retrieval. Risks for the egg retrieval procedure are minimal, as Dr. Carmone and Dr. Goulet mentioned, but with any surgical procedure, you are at risk of bleeding and or infection. Those are kind of the two main risks that we see in surgeries. Our complication rate is pretty much non-existent because we have had great outcomes with donors. After the egg retrieval, you may feel a bit crampy in the abdominal region, much like period cramps, but you are not in a position where you feel unwell to do things on your own. By the time you're ready to go home, you're actually walking out the door of our clinic and to your ride. And for the rest of the day, you kind of take it easy. You might need to take some Tylenol or Advil that day, but nothing more than typical kind of rest and Advil and Tylenol at home. Nothing more than that you should need.
We have another question coming in here. What do you think about the donor having the COVID-19 vaccine prior to donation? I see no issues with that. It doesn't appear to affect fertility. And so I think, if anything, it's going to be a good thing, not a bad one for everyone involved. But I don't, there hasn't been demonstrated to be any impact of the COVID-19 vaccine on egg donors. Lots of questions here. Okay, how about this? You mentioned genetic testing on donors. Can you elaborate on what specific types of testing is done? Is family health history considered? And how is that verified? Tiara, that's another question for you there.
Okay, yeah. So we do what we call genetic carrier testing for all of our donors. So carrier testing is where we're looking for what we call genetic flags. Most genetic conditions, and I say most, not all, but most genetic conditions will require you to have 2 copies of that condition, one from egg and one from sperm, to both be passed down in order for you to exhibit that condition. And I'm saying most again. Many of us are actually carriers, which means we have 1 copy, so we don't have both copies and therefore do not actually have the condition, but can pass down that copy to any offspring. And so what we're looking for in donors is, do you have a genetic flag? And if so, that's important for the recipient to know, so that the sperm source can also be tested and make sure that the sperm source does not carry the same flag. If egg donor and sperm source carried the same flag, there is a chance that both would be passed down and the resulting offspring can exhibit that condition. So the testing that we do covers nearly over 100 conditions. They are more of the major conditions that we're looking for, so it does not rule out everything. But we also do go through a health history. One, just through interview with the donor, we have to fill out a medical history form. And 2, we also have them interviewed by a genetic counselor. So genetic counselor will go through a pretty extensive questionnaire with them, asking questions that may prompt the donor to think of conditions that may run in their family or things they're uncertain of. So we do have a certified genetic counselor that does a very in-depth review with them to make sure that we are collecting any information that we can get so that a recipient has access to that.
I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what Tiara said there about the carrier screening, specifically what conditions are included in that panel. And I can't list all 100 plus because most of them I've never even heard of and can't pronounce very well. But the more common ones that are tested include things like spinal muscular atrophy, sickle cell anemia, the thalassemias, Fragile X. But one thing that these do not test for and cannot diagnose are things like autism. And so I know that's a fairly frequent question that I get from my patients, can we test for this because there's a concern, but unfortunately there is no test that exists to screen for that.
And, we don't know what causes autism. Seems like there's a number of causes. So the general rule is if we don't know what causes it, we can't test for it. That's kind of what I usually explain. The other thing that the genetic testing doesn't necessarily do is we're not looking for potential health risks for the donor or the recipients, for example, when we do genetic testing, we're not looking at cancer genes, which may impact your risk for cancer in the future. Those types of things are typically specialized tests that are done when a significant family medical history is elicited. And if a donor has an extensive family history of anything like that, then we would potentially disqualify those donors from donating basically for that reason. Maybe we can talk a little bit more now about recipients and their journey. So Dr. Goulet, let's talk about, we already kind of talked about fresh versus frozen. How about success rates using donor eggs?
Yeah, they are generally very high, especially when we're using professional egg donors, these anonymous egg donors. They're recruited and selected specifically because we view them as having a very high fertility potential. And so when you use a donor egg that you've selected through a commercial egg bank, for example, you can feel assured that you have a very high chance of pregnancy. You know, depending on which agency you use or which commercial egg bank, anywhere from 60% upward is generally the pregnancy rates that we see using these donor eggs. When you use a directed donor, such as your younger sister, you know, a lot of it depends on their fertility potential. So if they're 35 years old, and you know their AMH is reasonable but not as high as it was when they were 22, we would still expect success, but it may not give us the surplus of eggs and embryos that you would get if you were otherwise using a donor.
Yeah. How about what information is available when choosing a donor? What do we see when we're looking at donor profiles?
Yeah, you actually see quite a bit when looking at donor profiles. So you will get typically baby photos as well as adult photos, so you can see, you know, what the donor looks like at various stages in their lives. You do get a copy of a profile that they fill out, and they are aware that this is being shared with potential recipients. It includes things about their height, their weight, so their eye color, hair color, body type, as well as even things such as education. What do they like to do in their free time? There's even questions about why are you donating? What do you aspire to do, you know, career-wise? Lots of things that kind of give you a sense of who is this donor, you know, even though they're on paper, on my computer screen, you know, who is this donor, and do I think that they would be a good fit for me? So lots of things have become accessible to recipients, you know, more so than ever before. So it's great to see how you can learn about the donor just through, you know, what they've listed in a profile online.
How about, can you tell us a little bit about how to find a donor? Where do I go to find a donor?
So you can find a donor typically kind of two major ways, either through an agency or through an egg bank. So at the Fertility Institute here, we do work with agencies. We also work with Donor Egg Bank USA. So Donor Egg Bank USA, I'll start there. It provides frozen donor eggs. So frozen donor eggs come in what we call lots of eggs. So you'll receive anywhere from 6 to 8 eggs that were previously frozen. So they're available for use now. Donor Egg Bank USA, if you do a quick Google on them, you can see profiles as soon as you sign up for an account with them. So through an egg bank such as DEB, Donor Egg Bank USA, or through an agency, there are hundreds of agencies in the US, also abroad, that you can look through, and agencies will also have a similar process for which you can view profiles through their companies. And lastly, fertility clinics may also recruit internally too. So here at FIH, we do have some internal egg donors that we offer to cycle fresh for recipients, and all of our egg donors that we recruit internally have successfully cycled for Donor Egg Bank previously, which is a perk. So we know how they cycle and how they stimulate, so that we can ensure if you are being matched with them for a fresh cycle, they have had good success previously.
And how about for those donors or for those recipients rather, who are interested in maybe utilizing a donor that they can meet? what are the options there, and whether their potential offspring could be those donors in the future?
Yeah, so majority of egg donation is anonymous. So that's the most popular option you'll find with using an egg donor, meaning you will not know the identity of the donor and the donor will not know the identity of you. But if you are interested in using an egg donor who you'd like to meet in person or potentially provide their information for future offspring to have contact with that donor, there are donors who are willing to cycle and agree to what we call a kind of a limited open donation. So at the age of 18, the offspring, when they turn 18, may be able to reach out to that donor if they are interested. So that is an option that donors are given with certain agencies and egg banks. With Donor Egg Bank, that is one of the options that the Donor Egg Bank gives the donor when they sign up. They can opt for, yes, I would like to be contacted, or, provide my contact info when the child turns 18, or no, I'm not open to that. So it really depends on the donor and their preference, as well as the options that the agency is offering. Unless you want to use a directed donor who in real life, a friend or a family member, those are kind of your options.
And to elaborate on that, even if they choose to be open to contact at the age of 18, it's meant for a sort of brief, maybe telephone call, maybe coffee if they're interested in that, but it's not meant to establish a long-term relationship to get to know that genetic ancestry. It's really meant to be more of a one-time sort of an introduction.
An introduction, yes, correct. I believe there would probably be agencies out there who facilitate to providing donors who are open to an open donation. I'm sure there are out there, but it's definitely a bit tougher to find, but doable.
Yeah. I want to kind of circle back to some important questions for donors, and then I think we also should just briefly talk about donor embryos as well, because we kind of haven't really talked much about that. But I'm sure that if there are any donors watching, they're interested in how these cycles are compensated and how many times they can donate. Tiara, maybe you can go over that.
Yeah, so depending on where you donate through, agencies or clinics, everyone will compensate a little differently. In general, what I see for general compensation across the board is probably anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000 in that range. But again, it really depends on who you donate with, what that agency is compensating, and even other things such as have you donated previously. So compensation can vary, but in terms of how many times you can donate, so you can donate typically up to 6 times, and so each time you donate, you will receive compensation. And one other thing I wanted to mention for anyone who's interested in donating with our clinic, we do provide a gift card as a thank you every time you come in for one of your screening visits. So, on top of that compensation at the end, every time you come in for an appointment, we realize your time is valuable and it's, a commitment you're making. So we do want to say thank you with a gift card. So you will receive a $50 gift card every time you're coming into an appointment with us.
And are there any restrictions during the cycle? What do you tell the donors about physical activity, sex?
Yeah, so physical activity during a cycle is okay to engage in as long as you kind of feel that you're up for it. As we mentioned before, your abdominal region is going to feel pretty bloated and full at times, and so we don't recommend you engage in strenuous activities, but light physical activity is okay. You also don't want to overexert yourself, but you do not need to be in bed rest the whole time. You don't have to be sitting every day. You can still engage in pretty much all normal activity. In terms of sex, so we do not recommend, we highly advise against having intercourse during the duration of your donation cycle. And reason being is you are at higher risk of pregnancy since we are stimulating the ovaries. So we do ask that you either avoid sexual intercourse, or it's very important to use barrier methods.
Yeah, and that's because of the risk of multiples, and because it's possible that some of the eggs that are being released are not collected. And So potentially a donor could be fertile around the time of their cycle. Maybe we can talk about, Dr. Goulet, can you start talking a little bit about donor embryo cycles and what that is?
Yeah, and so there are situations where a couple may, instead of choosing to purchase a lot of donor eggs, or I call them a half dozen donor eggs, or a cycle of a donor egg, they may instead choose to utilize an embryo that has already been created and has been donated into an embryo bank. The benefits of this is that they're generally more cost effective because the embryo has already been created, so we don't need to worry about the cost of putting someone through an IVF stimulation in order to retrieve the eggs or to bank the eggs. So the embryos are already there. There are financial costs with it, but generally less than that of a donor egg. Generally, these donor embryos come from couples who have gone through IVF and have completed their family. And they said, we think that these are great embryos, we care about them, and we want to be able to share them with other couples who have struggled like us. And so there are a surplus of embryos available nationwide right now. You can go through select agencies, and depending on the agency's mission and their stated goals, they may have stringent or selective criteria. Some of them require interviews, home visits. A lot of these are religiously affiliated, so they may have religious preferences as well. But a lot of the donor embryos that are available at your local IVF clinic. Here at Fertility Institute of Hawaii, we also have an embryo bank. And so if you are interested in using a donor embryo, please reach out to us because we would love to get you matched to an embryo that would be perfect for you.
And so Tiare, what do recipients do when they are going to be undergoing a donor embryo cycle? Is there a database that we have? What are they?
We do have a database, so if anyone is watching who is interested, potentially considering embryo donation, we're happy to share that information with you. And so much like when you use an egg donor, when you use an embryo donor, we do also build a profile. The profile is a bit more limited than an egg donor, just because many embryo donors are a bit more private about their family and identity. And so for embryo donors, we collect information, physical characteristics, so eye color, hair color, weight, height, any information about medical or health background that would be pertinent to letting a recipient know about. They also do provide information about previous cycles they have done via IVF using the same embryos that they have donated. So that's actually at our program here, that is a requirement of patients looking to donate their embryos. They must have had a successful pregnancy using the embryos from the same batch that they're donating. So you do get to know a bit about the donor, but again, a little more limited than an egg donor. Some programs require it. We do not require pictures for the embryo donor, so sometimes photos are unavailable, just again to respect the privacy. But things such as physical traits, characteristics, we try to get as much of that into these profiles as we can, so you can have an idea before choosing.
I think donor embryos are great options for people who are going to be requiring the use of donor eggs as well as donor sperm. For people who find it to be the most affordable option, or for people who feel that accepting an embryo that's already been created is kind of a nice thing and maybe the right thing to do. It does vary. I mean, the language has significantly changed over the last few years. I think that initially a lot of the agencies, which some of them religiously affiliated, do view it as more of an adoption process. It used to be referred to as embryo adoption pretty commonly. And as Dr. Goulet mentioned, they might require home visits, and it's sort of a similar process to adoption. Some agencies, including us, don't quite view it as so as adoption, because these are embryos which have not yet been transferred, and so for us we kind of use the terminology of donation, and it's a little bit of a simpler process. So if you're kind of taken aback by costs and the process involved with one agency for embryo donation, you can certainly look into others, because the processes can be quite different from agency to agency and potentially from fertility clinic to fertility clinic as well. So I do think that the treatment and everything can be personalized to you.
And state to state too, because of the adoption versus the embryo donation sort of wording and language. States such as Hawaii are much more generous when it comes to facilitating things like embryo donation, whereas there are other states where they view this only as an adoption and you must go through the very expensive adoption paperwork. So we're really fortunate here in Hawaii to be able to offer this as a accessible way to build a family.
There's two questions here that I want to answer. So one person is asking, as a potential recipient, is it hard for me to pick a donor? Is the only way to do this through looking through profiles manually, or is there someone available who can match what we're looking for? I think that what we can't, ultimately it's really up to you who you choose. So we're not exactly matching in terms of choosing a donor for you, but we can certainly help you. So if you tell us that you're looking for, TRA, for example, knows what's in the database very well. So if you say that you're looking for a particular donor, perhaps you're looking based on ethnicity, perhaps you want a donor with a particular ethnic background, TRA may be able to, she kind of knows those donors and might say, okay, well, these are the embryos we have available with that background. Or in terms of fresh cycle donor eggs, she might be able to do the same thing and say, okay, well, I know we have these donors in our database, and I imagine that most agencies will be able to offer that type of help. But ultimately, you will manually look through the profiles that you're potentially interested in, and ultimately be responsible for choosing which donor you like.
I make the comparison that especially with the commercial egg banks, looking at your donors is like looking at Match.com, where you're going through page by page of different profiles. There are some agencies that still do the old-fashioned catalog that they've put together, but I think in general, most people have turned into an online sort of database to help you look at the different profiles.
Another person is asking what the process is to donate unused embryos. I'm going to have Tiara answer that, but let me answer, what is the cost of using a donor embryo? That really, again, that does vary based on agency. It is less expensive than using donor eggs. And so if donor eggs are 18,000 plus, using donor embryos are going to be 10,000 and a couple thousand lower potentially, depending on where you go. So it can be, half the cost. And what you're really paying for is you're kind of assuming the storage fees, right? And you're kind of paying for the services for you as a recipient, but you're not paying for the embryo and the creation of that embryo, which has already been created. But Terry, maybe you can mention, at least in our center, what is the process to donate unused embryos?
Yeah, so the process to donate unused embryos as a donor is that you would contact your coordinator here or contact our office, let us know you're interested, and one of us will reach out to you. We will provide you with an online login to our embryo options online portal, and you will fill out some questions about your ethnicity, height and weight, educational background, social background, just so that we can put that information together to give to a potential recipient. Anything you enter in this kind of profile questionnaire that is identifying, so name, that is never disclosed to the recipient. At least at our center, it is 100% anonymous. So there is an online process that you go through. Once you complete kind of that questionnaire, we will set you up for a quick phone call with one of the physicians that you worked with here, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and you understand what comes along with the process of donating, and just to make sure that this is 100% what you want to do. After that, there is some paperwork that we have you do. A lot of it we can have you DocuSign electronically. So much of this process has been streamlined to make it easier for you to do at home. And kind of after those 3 steps, the donation is complete. It will go into our embryo bank here for potential recipients to view. And that's about it. So it's simple, but does take a few steps.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you guys feel like we need to touch on or talk about? I feel like we've been talking for a really long time.
I think Paige might have had one more question. And hi, Paige. Is the donor embryo affected by how long ago it was frozen?
That's a good question. So it shouldn't be, okay? However, because embryos don't, as far as we know, oh my gosh, John Frederelli is making comments. Shouldn't you be like on vacation or something? So the embryos don't expire. So that really shouldn't affect the quality of the embryos. However, the technology for freezing embryos has gotten better with time. And so if embryos were frozen, for example, with older technology like slow freezing versus the newer technology such as vitrification, then the success rates may be lower. And, you know, I anticipate that in the future, maybe, hopefully, technology will be even better. And so that is something to keep in mind. But if the embryos are within the last few years and have been vitrified, as most have been at this point, then success rates will be similar regardless of how long it's been.
I think the oldest embryo that's ever been thawed and made a beautiful, healthy baby was what, 25, 26 years old about? Does that sound right? I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was just recently in the news. So exciting. Dr. Frederelli is asking, can we explain the difference between anonymous and unknown? I don't know. What is he trying to say there? What is anonymous and unknown? John, do you want to type in your answer to that? Where are you going with that? I mean, anonymous, I don't know where he's going with that. Yeah. I mean, you know, anonymous donors need to meet certain criteria is he talking about the FDA rules? Gosh, I don't know what he's talking about. The anonymous donors need to meet certain criteria in terms of a donor. Well, unknown is kind of similar to anonymous, right? Unless you're talking about the FDA kind of rules regarding this. So if you are, do you mean known?
Known, I think.
Do you mean known? Do you mean directed, known versus anonymous? Is that what you mean, Dr. Frederelli? Because sort of anonymous is similar to unknown. I think we did kind of, come on, with social media, no one is anonymous. Yeah, okay, so, yeah, but we still call it anonymous. I don't know where he's going with that. But yes, now with 23andMe and social media, the issue here, okay, is that even though donors are anonymous, okay, and we're not disclosing their information to anyone, there's always that possibility that in the future, you know, perhaps they do genetic testing, the offspring also do genetic testing like 23andMe, and they might see each other as family members, right? Even if the donor doesn't do 23andMe and do genetic testing, if the donor's family members do it and the offspring do it, then they're going to be able to figure out what's what. And so the typical recommendations regarding disclosure, right, is that this should be something that can be private, but not secret. Okay, so typically this is not something that you want to hide from your children that were created with donor eggs, because that's not the right thing to do. Okay, first of all, but also because they will find out, and you certainly wouldn't want them to be in the situation where they find out in other ways without having found out from you. So I think I see it as similar to like income. Somebody's income is not necessarily secret, but it's private. You don't necessarily talk about it, but it's not secret. And I think egg donation is kind of similar. So I think that's what Dr. Frederelli is trying to say.
We have one more question here. Is cryo storage here in Hawaii or is it on the mainland?
So, okay, thank you. I got a thumbs up from him. My gosh. So cryo storage is for our patients is here for donor embryos, right? And patients may choose to ship their embryos elsewhere and ship them back here if they want. With donor egg bank, okay, if you're going to be using an egg bank, then you can use eggs that were created elsewhere, and those eggs can then be shipped to us. But we have on-site storage. That may not be the case at every center.
And the good news is that Donor Egg Bank has very good data that shows even with the shipping, there's no harm, there's no disadvantage to eggs that have had to undergo transport. They're very carefully tracked. We keep a close eye on where these eggs are at every moment during transport. And so if you do choose to ship your eggs from somewhere, you can do that feeling assured that your eggs are safe and that there is no damage that they're going to accumulate from that transport.
Okay. Any other questions? Or John, do you have any riddles for us that you want us to try to solve here in public, online? No? Right. Well, it's been wonderful speaking to all of you. If any of you are interested in donor embryos, donor eggs, or just fertility treatment in general, please do reach out to us. You'll get to meet us, and you certainly will run into Ms. Tiare Brown as well, who will certainly help you along the journey. For donors who are interested in filling out an application, that's something that can be done. You can contact us. You can go online as well. And it's been wonderful talking to you guys today. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.